Wealthy entrepreneur slaps his pregnant wife in public in front of his mistress, but he didn't know they were watching. The crowned wolf of elite society, Julian Roth, a self-made tycoon known for his impeccable suits, a sky-high penthouse, and a pregnant wife adored by many. Yet beneath the front-page glamour and dazzling charity galas, something darker simmered. There were rumors, a mistress whose charm threatened to unravel the picture-perfect marriage. But no one could have predicted the public explosion that would soon unfold, nor the moment Julian's fury spiraled into an act that shocked everyone. What he didn't know was that his wife had a devastating secret of her own, one that would upend everything he thought he controlled. Julian Roth was the embodiment of the American dream. Born in a struggling Detroit neighborhood, he had clawed his way to the top with unyielding ambition. By his mid-30s, he was the head of Roth Dynamics, a vast empire covering tech, real estate ventures, boutique hotels, and charitable initiatives. People admired his cinematic smile and envied the golden life he appeared to lead. Each morning, Julian's private driver delivered him to the towering 60-story Roth Tower in downtown Chicago, proudly bearing his name. Inside, employees whispered about his legendary dedication, arriving before sunrise, leaving only when the skyline glowed with city lights. Polished, commanding, and forever composed, Julian had a reputation for turning every project he touched into gold. The media adored him, portraying him as both a groundbreaking mogul and the ideal husband. His wife, Camille Roth, née Whitaker, was the graceful daughter of real estate giant Richard Whitaker. Their wedding, just 2 years earlier, had been a grand affair at Chicago's historic Blackstone Hotel, attended by dignitaries, celebrities, and global power players. Camille moved with refined elegance, earning her the nickname the Dove among society's elite. Camille's dedication to philanthropy, organizing children's hospital drives and supporting women's shelters, made her a beloved figure among the city's social elite. When news of her pregnancy surfaced, the tabloids erupted with joy over the next chapter in the Roth fairy tale. Editors battled for exclusive announcements and nursery previews. Paparazzi camped outside every high-end OB/GYN clinic in downtown Chicago, desperate for a glimpse of the couple leaving with ultrasound photos in hand. But even amid this gilded life, cracks began to surface. Camille sensed Julian's growing distance. His frequent business trips to Vancouver didn't align with Roth Dynamics' official schedule. Private dinner plans were regularly canceled at the last moment. She told herself it was simply the price of ambition. Her father, after all, had poured his life into the Whitaker empire. Maybe Julian, in his relentless pursuit of greatness, was just overworked. Still, a quiet unease wove through their home. Julian's temper had grown shorter, his stares more vacant, and resentments lingered unspoken. He rarely attended her prenatal appointments anymore, sending a personal assistant instead with apologies wrapped in urgent meetings. Camille brushed it off. She told herself she could do this pregnancy alone if she had to. But fate had a habit of exposing lies. Unknown to Camille, Julian was keeping secrets. At Roth Tower, whispers swirled. Some employees had seen a woman leaving his office late at night, dressed in luxury labels like Dior and Valentino, stepping into a sleek black sedan that didn't belong to Camille. Yet, fear of Julian's wrath kept mouths closed and suspicions buried. Camille continued her charity work, often resting her hands protectively on her growing stomach. She still believed in Julian's love, in the world they had built. But as the city churned beneath their skyscrapers, a storm of betrayal, heartbreak, and truths waited to erupt. The first to sense the shift was Natalie Price, Julian's long-trusted assistant. Sharp and observant, Natalie had joined Roth Dynamics fresh out of college and earned Julian's confidence through sheer dedication. But in recent months, she noticed inconsistencies. Meetings held in places not listed on official calendars, lavish floral deliveries addressed to unknown recipients, credit card charges for dinners she never booked. One afternoon, she ran into Camille in the executive lounge. Camille looked pale, rubbing her lower back, the pregnancy clearly taking a toll. Still, she wore her usual grace. Natalie approached carefully. "Mrs. Roth, how are you feeling?" Camille offered a faint smile. "Tired, but that's normal, right? Third trimester isn't exactly a walk in the park." Natalie nodded, debating whether to say more. Something in Camille's eyes seemed to ask for the truth. If you need anything, I'm here, Natalie said gently, her voice intentionally neutral. She couldn't afford to voice any suspicions about Julian, not in a corporate setting. Camille's eyes softened with a flicker of appreciation. Thank you, Natalie. I'll remember that. The tension lingered in the air, subtle but suffocating. Camille's smile faded the moment Natalie turned away, her hand instinctively resting over her belly. The growing life inside her felt more fragile than ever. She glanced at the photos on her desk, images from their wedding, from happier times, and for the first time she wondered how much of it had been real. That evening, Natalie found Julian in his office, rifling through files with impatient energy. His tie was undone, his expression taut with irritation. "Natalie," he said without looking up, "there's a red folder on your desk. Get a courier to deliver it immediately to the Halston Hotel. Mark it private and confidential." She hesitated. "Sir, do you mean the Roth Halston property in Vancouver?" His gaze snapped to hers, sharp. "No, the Halston in downtown Chicago." It was just minutes from their headquarters. A courier seemed unnecessary, but she gave a quick nod, not daring to question him further. After he left, she checked the envelope carefully. The recipient was listed as Miss Sabrina Devereaux, Suite 4201, the Halston. Natalie's stomach knotted. That name wasn't linked to any vendors or partners. Still, she sealed the folder and made the call, but her thoughts raced. The air around Roth Tower had shifted in recent months, a chill of secrecy that clung to closed doors and after-hours meetings. Natalie had noticed. Everyone had. But no one dared to name what they feared. Not yet. Meanwhile, Camille's father, Richard Whitaker, was growing uneasy. A seasoned businessman himself, he noticed troubling patterns. Deals that once ran smoothly now clouded with vague contracts and complex disclaimers. During a Whitaker Foundation dinner, he approached Julian discreetly. "Julian," he said, hand resting firmly on his son-in-law's shoulder, "I've noticed some unusual directions in your recent expansions. Are you sure you're not overreaching, especially now, with the baby on the way?" Julian forced a smile. "I appreciate the concern, sir, but I've got it handled. I'm on the cusp of something that's going to place Roth Dynamics on the global map like never before." Richard wasn't convinced. His gaze drifted toward Camille. She stood across the room, poised as always, but her shoulders carried a weight he hadn't seen before. She smiled at guests, but her eyes never settled. That flicker of unrest lodged itself deep in Richard's gut. The uneasy glint in her expression mirrored his growing doubts. Beneath the surface of refinement, something felt terribly off. But how deep the fractures ran, he couldn't yet tell. Whispers echoed through the halls of Roth Tower, subtle warnings lost on those unwilling to see. In the heart of Chicago, a story of deception was brewing. One that would explode with a force even the city's sleepless skyline couldn't anticipate. Midweek, Julian stepped into a private elevator at the Halston Hotel. The soft hum carried him to the top floor, where Sabrina Devereaux waited. When she opened the door, she wore a crimson silk robe, lips curled into a slow, smoky smile. Alluring, untamed, Sabrina was the kind of woman who seemed made to unravel powerful men. She claimed to be an art dealer from Marseille, expanding her client list in Chicago, but her meetings with Julian had little to do with actual business. "Darling," Sabrina purred, stepping aside as he entered the penthouse suite. The space was extravagant, floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the skyline, ivory sofas, and an unmistakable cloud of perfume clinging to the air. Julian shrugged off his coat, nerves frayed. He had canceled 2 meetings at Roth Tower to be here, something his earlier, more disciplined self would have never done. But Sabrina's magnetism was undeniable. His mind, once razor-focused on mergers and boardroom power plays, now unraveled the moment her perfume hit him. The high-rise air felt electric around her, the silence between them charged with indulgence and escape. She had a way of making him forget his responsibilities, his marriage, even the unborn child he hadn't yet held. "I can't stay long," he murmured, though his voice lacked conviction. "I just needed to see you." Her laugh was low, seductive. "I'm flattered. I was beginning to think your wife had tightened the leash." He stiffened at Camille's name. "Let's not talk about her," he said curtly. Sabrina arched a brow. "Your call." She slipped her arms around his neck. "Anyway, I've got a surprise for you." She led him to a small marble table, where a bottle of vintage champagne rested in a silver bucket. He raised an eyebrow. You didn't have to. She winked. A toast to our next move. I'll be flying to Europe soon for an auction. Maybe Roth Dynamics would like to sponsor the trip? You could tag along, make it business. The offer lingered, loaded with more than just financial opportunity. Julian considered it, brushing aside the flicker of guilt. In his mind, Camille's face threatened to surface, tired but serene, cradling her growing belly, but he shoved it aside, burying the image beneath ambition and lust. We'll see, he said quietly. He popped the cork and they drank. Sabrina swirled her glass, her eyes never leaving his. In that moment, everything else faded. The city, the boardroom chaos, even Camille's silence, all dissolved in the glint of champagne and the shimmer of Sabrina's smile. What Julian didn't know was that Sabrina had her own plan. She'd begun casually prying about his accounts, his future ventures, his powerful acquaintances. She craved the prestige that came with being close to Julian Roth, viewing this affair as a stepping stone to something far more influential. Every word she whispered, every lingering touch was calculated. She memorized names, followed financial leads, and plotted the kind of access only men like Julian could give her. Every now and then, she caught her reflection in the mirror and smiled. It was all working. They spent another hour together. When Julian finally left, he pressed a lingering kiss to her lips. As he stepped into the hallway, unease rippled through him. What if someone saw me? But he shook it off. He was Julian Roth, untouchable. What he couldn't have known was that, just a few feet away, a bellhop named Marco Villanueva recognized him instantly. Marco had served at the Whitaker Foundation's gala the year before and remembered Julian well. Moments later, Marco reached for his phone, a call that would spark the unraveling of Julian Roth's tightly protected double life, one that would soon explode in public view, dragging Camille, Sabrina, and everyone around them into the fallout. The following evening, Camille sat at the edge of the penthouse sofa, flipping through cutouts of nursery inspiration from interior magazines. She had envisioned a palette of soft mint, sage, and lilac, colors that would soothe and welcome their baby into a peaceful space. Julian, however, had contributed little. Every time she asked, he referenced pressing matters at work. Each unanswered question, each avoided suggestion, became a stitch in the widening seam between them, unraveling the warmth she had once trusted so deeply. When he finally walked in, the stress in his body was impossible to miss. He moved past the array of fabric samples and baby catalogs without a word, not even a glance. Camille's heart sank. It wasn't just the silence, it was the indifference. She pushed aside the hurt and approached him gently. Julian, there's a charity gala next Friday for the Children's Hospital. I'm co-hosting it. Will you be able to come? He didn't meet her gaze, tugging his tie loose. I don't know. I might be out of town, he said flatly. She set her magazine down. Out of town again? Where this time? He shot her a look, sharp, impatient. I need to wrap up an international deal. That's it. His tone made it clear. No further discussion. Camille felt frustration stir beneath her chest, but her voice stayed even. You've been traveling a lot lately. Vancouver, Toronto, even hotels here in Chicago. Are you sure all of these trips are really about business? He turned toward her slowly, eyes glinting cold. You're checking up on me? Is that what we are now? Me justifying every second of my schedule? Camille closed her eyes briefly, steadying herself. It's not checking up. I want my husband here. I've gone to every appointment alone. The baby's due in a few weeks. Don't you want to be here? For us? Julian's jaw clenched. For a moment, something like guilt flickered. But it vanished behind a wall of defensiveness. I'm building our future, Camille. You think this life just pays for itself? If I don't keep these deals moving, everything we've built could fall apart. His words landed like blows, not because of their volume, but their distance. She wasn't asking for opulence. She was asking for presence. And he couldn't offer even that. Her chin quivered, but she didn't let tears come. You've changed, she whispered. Somewhere along the way, you became someone I barely recognize. He stared at her, words unspoken choking in his throat. Then, without a reply, he turned and stormed into his study. Camille stood frozen in the living room, her heart pounding in the silence he left behind. The gulf between them felt wider than ever. Inside his study, Julian dropped into his leather chair. The city glimmered beyond the tall windows, but he couldn't see it. All he saw was his reflection, hollow eyes, jaw tight. A man torn between two worlds, the intoxicating escape Sabrina offered, the steadfast devotion Camille still gave him, and the child that tied them together. The success he had once celebrated now felt like a cage. Gilded, yes, but suffocating. He didn't want to think about it. Not tonight. But the weight pressed in, and he suddenly realized he was the one who had built this prison. As Julian sat alone in the dim study, Camille's phone vibrated on the kitchen counter. A text appeared from an unknown number. "I have information about your husband. We should talk. Marco Villanueva." Camille's brow furrowed. The name meant nothing to her, but something in the message's urgency struck a chord, an unsettling mixture of anxiety and instinct. Her fingers trembled as she picked up the phone, pulse quickening, the heaviness of dread pressing on her chest like a stone. She opened the message with a trembling finger, unaware that she was about to pry open the walls Julian had spent months carefully constructing around his secret life. Early the next morning, Camille slipped quietly into a small cafe tucked away in a quiet corner of downtown. She wore a modest black trench coat, her scarf pulled loosely around her neck to obscure her face. In a corner booth sat a young man in a bellhop uniform, his name tag reading Marco Villanueva. He looked nervous, stirring his coffee without pause. When she approached, he quickly stood. "Mrs. Roth, it's an honor to meet you." "Just Camille," she said softly, sliding into the seat across from him. Marco nodded, his eyes darting toward the door as though he feared someone might be listening. "I don't know how to say this exactly. I saw your husband at the Halston Hotel." He paused, eyes full of hesitation. "He was visiting a suite on the top floor. More than once. I recognized him from that fundraiser last year. And he wasn't with you." Camille's stomach dropped. Her breath caught in her chest, but she kept her face composed. It was as if time paused, her body numb, her mind spiraling in slow-motion disbelief. "You're sure it was him?" He nodded and pulled out his phone. After a few taps, he turned the screen toward her. A photo, slightly blurry, but clearly Julian exiting the elevator with a striking brunette on his arm. Camille brought her hand to her lips. Her heart thudded painfully in her chest. The image burned into her memory. There it was. Proof. A fracture line in her reality becoming a full break. "Why are you telling me this?" she asked, voice unsteady but free of accusation. Marco's expression shifted with guilt. "My mom, she works housekeeping at the Halston. They treated her badly a while back. She's also a big admirer of yours. She volunteers at one of the shelters you fund. When I realized what I'd seen, I couldn't keep quiet. You deserve to know." He hesitated, then added, "The woman's name, she said it out loud once. Sabrina Devereaux." Camille closed her eyes. The name echoed in her ears like a warning bell. A storm of betrayal and disbelief welled inside her, followed swiftly by a protective fire for the child growing within her. The betrayal wasn't just emotional, it was existential. Her baby's world, once envisioned in pastels and lullabies, now felt built on cracked marble. She took a steadying breath. "Thank you for telling me. I know this wasn't easy." Marco gave a small nod, visibly relieved. "I just hope you can do something about it. You really seem like someone who deserves better." Camille reached into her purse and pulled out a discreet envelope. She slid it across the table to him without a word. "I appreciate your honesty. Please, take this," Camille said softly, sliding the envelope across the table. Marco hesitated, his hand hovering over it, clearly torn. But at her gentle insistence, he accepted it with a small, grateful nod. Rising from the booth, he adjusted his cap and turned to go. Camille lightly touched his arm. "You've done something important today. Thank you." Outside, the city pulsed with life. Cars honking, commuters weaving through crosswalks, neon signs blinking above cafes and corner stores. Yet for Camille, the noise felt distant, almost surreal, drowned out by the emotional storm thundering in her chest. It felt like walking underwater, her steps slow, her breath shallow, as if grief had become gravity. Each step back toward the street felt heavier than the last. The image of Julian with another woman, so bold, so unapologetic, looped in her mind like a broken film reel. But amidst the heartbreak, a spark of defiance flared. She was Camille Roth, daughter of Richard Whittaker. She had grown up navigating boardrooms, not just ballrooms. She thought of the baby growing inside her, of her father's legacy, and her own influence through the Whittaker Foundation. I won't fall apart, she told herself. The pain would not paralyze her, not when she had more than herself to protect. No. She would gather proof, plan carefully, and protect what mattered. The morning after her discreet meeting with Marco Villanueva, Camille scheduled an appointment with her father's trusted attorney, Margaret Cho. Margaret, a sharp, no-nonsense woman in her late 50s, had advised the Whitaker family for decades. She welcomed Camille into a discreet, wood-paneled law office just off Michigan Avenue. "Camille, sweetheart, come in," Margaret said, concern softening her normally firm tone. Once the door was shut, Camille opened her phone and handed it over. Margaret tapped through the grainy images in silence. Her expression hardened. "This is serious," she said at last. "An affair, particularly while you're pregnant, could lead to significant legal leverage." Camille's hands folded in her lap. "Julian made promises. To me, to our child. He's broken them. I'm not rushing toward divorce, Margaret. I just need to know where I stand." Her voice wavered only slightly, but her eyes told the truth. They were the eyes of a woman steeling herself for battle. Margaret nodded, already pulling documents from her leather briefcase. "Your prenuptial agreement has clauses that trigger in cases of infidelity, abuse, or desertion. We'll need more evidence, transaction records, communications, confirmed sightings. But if it holds up, we can protect your financial rights and your child's future." She paused. "These proceedings can get ugly. Are you ready for that?" Camille's jaw set. "I'm ready to protect my child. I'm not out to destroy Julian, but I won't let him or her dismantle what we've built." In her heart, fear mingled with fury. She would not allow her baby to inherit the consequences of betrayal. Margaret gave her hand a firm, reassuring squeeze. "Then we proceed quietly. Start gathering anything. Bank activity, messages, unusual expenses. I'll initiate a private audit to see if funds are being redirected. We'll move step by step. We'll assess the scale and decide next steps." Margaret concluded as Camille rose from her seat. She left the law office with a complex weight in her chest. Sadness, yes, but also a renewed sense of purpose. The sting of betrayal twisted in her gut, but the slow burn of determination steadied her stride. She couldn't afford illusions anymore. Meanwhile, Julian remained completely unaware that his wife was methodically laying the groundwork for quiet retaliation. He was too distracted by Sabrina's insistence on traveling abroad, by Camille's sudden emotional distance at home. Their dinners, when he bothered to attend, had grown painfully quiet. He'd tried to engage her with idle conversation, but Camille met him with reserved courtesy. It wasn't coldness that unsettled him. It was the deliberate calm, more cutting than any argument. He rationalized her demeanor as fatigue, maybe stress from the pregnancy or her foundation work. Sabrina, by contrast, had grown increasingly bold. She demanded Julian accompany her to an upcoming art exhibit at her gallery, a high-profile event where she hoped to flaunt their connection publicly. Julian declined, insisting he couldn't risk the gossip columns catching wind. Sabrina pouted, the spark between them dimming into friction. The power dynamics were shifting, but Julian remained oblivious. He believed he still held control over his business, his marriage, and the affair that fed his ego. But the illusion was starting to crack. Even the strongest walls collapse when hit by betrayal and justice colliding head-on. The beginning of the end came at a charity gala Camille co-chaired for the Whitaker Women's Initiative. Held in the majestic ballroom of the St. Regis Hotel, the space shimmered with elegance, crystal chandeliers, gold trim, and polished marble underfoot. Chicago's elite had turned out in force: lawmakers, celebrities, major donors. Camille, radiant in a floor-length emerald gown, moved gracefully through the crowd, her smile warm and practiced. Inside, however, she was steel. She caught sight of her father, Richard Whitaker, calmly sipping a martini near the auction displays. He offered her a discreet nod of encouragement. Then Julian arrived, an hour late, wearing his signature self-assured grin. His gaze, however, danced everywhere but toward his wife. And in a twist that made Camille's stomach clench, Sabrina Devereaux was there too. She'd finagled an invitation by donating a rare piece from her gallery to the auction. Dressed in liquid silver, Sabrina drew attention like a magnet. Her beauty lit up the room, but the weight of her presence filled it with static. Camille's skin tingled when their eyes met. She inhaled deeply, determined not to let emotion take the wheel. but murmurs soon rippled through the ballroom, subtle, then louder. Guests had begun noticing the glances Julian and Sabrina were exchanging. Far too close for two people who were supposedly mere acquaintances. Camille carried on her hostess duties, though every passing whisper sliced like a fresh wound. To make matters worse, Sabrina seemed intent on parading her familiarity with Julian, standing far too near him at the bar, laughing just a bit too loud. Natalie Price, who had been asked to assist with logistics that evening, picked up on the undercurrent. She approached Camille quietly, offering a light touch on her arm. "I'm here if you need anything," she whispered. Camille managed a polite but stiff smile, then turned her focus back to the event. When the time came for the evening's featured speech, she stepped onto the stage to speak about women's empowerment and the Foundation's ongoing mission. Her delivery was poised, her voice steady, but each sentence about safety, dignity, and respect for women landed like a personal rebuke, directed toward the one man who should have stood by her. Every word she spoke felt like she was stitching her own wound shut, one syllable at a time. The pain didn't crack her voice, it carved it into steel. In the middle of her remarks, her eyes drifted across the ballroom and caught sight of Julian and Sabrina whispering in a dark corner. The sight ignited something sharp inside her. Still, she pressed on, finishing her speech to a wave of enthusiastic applause. She stepped off the stage, hoping to find a moment to collect herself backstage. But before she could retreat, Sabrina brushed by her, elbowing her belly in the process. Whether it was intentional or not, Camille gasped from the sharp jolt of pain. Julian rushed over, but to her shock, it wasn't to help her. "Camille, watch where you're going," he snapped. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Sabrina stood behind him, a smug smirk twisting her lips. Tears welled in Camille's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "My stomach," she choked out, unable to finish the sentence as humiliation crushed her chest. Cameras clicked, conversations froze. It felt like time fractured, each second stretching into eternity under the glare of 100 eyes. In that moment, Julian Roth's carefully polished image cracked, right there under the gleaming chandeliers and the scrutiny of Chicago's most powerful. The illusion of their perfect marriage began to crumble, and something far more volatile crept into the void. In the aftermath, Camille slipped away from the stage, heart thundering. She clutched her belly, fear for her baby rising fast as her composure crumbled. She couldn't breathe. It felt like the walls of the ballroom were closing in. She aimed for the side corridor that led to the hotel's front lobby, needing space to breathe. But before she could reach the ornate double doors, heavy footsteps echoed behind her. She turned to find Julian storming toward her, fury etched across his face. Guests loitered nearby, some inching closer, unsure whether to step in. "What was that back there?" he hissed, voice low but biting. Camille's shock erupted into anger. "That?" she snapped. "That was me giving a speech to raise money for abused and homeless women, while you were busy entertaining her. And now you blame me?" He grabbed her arm roughly. "Keep your voice down," he warned, his grip tight. "You're making a scene." But Camille yanked her arm free, ignoring the sting of his fingers. "You're the one making a scene," Camille shot back, her voice trembling, part pain, part fury. "How dare you show up with her?" Julian glanced around, trying to quiet her. "We're in public, Camille. Don't do this here." Before she could answer, another figure inserted herself into the confrontation. Sabrina Devereaux, floating forward with the smug confidence of someone who thought she belonged. "Julian, darling, is everything all right?" she cooed, though her smirk betrayed how much she was enjoying Camille's anguish. Camille's glare cut through her. Tears welled in her eyes, but she willed them not to fall. "You have no right to call him that." "Not in front of me," she said, voice firm with outrage. The words trembled with restraint, each syllable edged in shattered pride. Around them, guests edged closer, forming a loose circle. Phones were subtly lifted, tucked behind clutches or hidden at their sides. The confrontation had turned into an unspoken performance. A heavy hush settled over the marble-clad lobby. Richard Whittaker appeared at the back of the crowd, his expression twisted in horror as he tried to push through to his daughter. Feeling the pressure mount, Julian snapped. "Stop acting like the victim, Camille. You have no idea the kind of pressure I'm under. The deals I'm negotiating. Sabrina is..." Whatever justification he was about to offer disappeared into a red haze of fury. Camille, stunned by the weight of his betrayal, lashed back. I do understand. I understand you're a liar and a cheater. That was the moment something inside Julian fractured. With no warning, his hand lashed out, striking Camille's cheek in a swift, brutal slap. The sound cracked through the air like lightning. Gasps erupted from the crowd. Camera shutters clicked in a flurry as the moment froze in time. Julian Roth, caught mid-assault under the blinding lights of a hotel lobby. The echo of that slap would reverberate through every corner of her memory. Camille staggered, her hand flying to her burning face. The world slowed, narrowed to that single act of horror. Sabrina's smirk vanished, replaced by a look of stunned disbelief. Richard finally broke through the circle of spectators. His voice roared across the lobby in a guttural cry of disbelief. In that single act, Julian Roth destroyed whatever remained of his golden reputation and thrust Camille into a space of heartbreak and fury she never imagined. For a breathless moment, no one moved. The crystal chandeliers overhead seemed frozen in shock, casting glittering reflections on the marble floor. Camille's cheek throbbed, her vision blurred. Her entire world had been reduced to a point of impact. Her hands instinctively cradled her stomach. The baby, her mind screamed. Then Richard was there, rushing forward. Richard shoved Julian aside, fury in his voice echoing through the marble foyer. Have you lost your damn mind? That's my daughter. You worthless excuse for a man. The crowd parted. Some rushed to Camille's side, others stood frozen, torn between helping and continuing to film what had become a full-blown public scandal. A nearby security guard hovered, clearly unsure whether to intervene in what had begun as a domestic scene, but escalated into a media disaster. Julian, his face twisted in a mix of rage and disbelief, finally grasped the gravity of what he had done. His chest heaved, adrenaline still flooding his system. She provoked me, he stammered, but the words sounded empty, pathetic amid the hush of horror surrounding him. Camille took a shaky breath, her hand still pressed against her stinging cheek. She looked him in the eye. There was no fear left, only an icy stillness he had never seen before. You hit me. Your pregnant wife, she said, each word cutting like glass. You've crossed a line, and no apology will ever erase it. Sabrina, wide-eyed and suddenly sobered, quietly slipped backward, clearly no longer interested in being near the mess she helped create. Richard turned his rage on her. And you, whoever you are, don't you dare go near my daughter again, he barked. Sabrina clutched her bag and disappeared into the crowd. The guests made way for her like water splitting from a ship's bow. Before Julian could react further, Richard turned to the security guard. Call an ambulance. My daughter is pregnant. The guard snapped to attention, moving quickly. But Camille, though barely keeping it together, shook her head. I don't need an ambulance, she said, voice trembling but firm. I just need to get away from him. Richard wrapped a steadying arm around her and led her toward the exit. Outside, the paparazzi had already gathered, drawn by the noise, the whispers, the energy. As Camille stepped into the night, camera flashes exploded around her, capturing every tear-streaked expression, every fragile step. Richard shielded her as best he could, guiding her to the waiting limousine. Julian stumbled after them, desperate to regain control. Camille, wait, don't walk away, let's just talk. She turned, her face pale but her glare seething with contempt. Don't you dare come near me. Her voice carried the cold finality of a slammed vault door. She slid into the back of the limousine. Richard followed. The door shut with a thud, and the car sped off into the neon-lit Chicago night. Julian stood alone, dazed, the camera flashes still bursting like fireworks. Within minutes, tabloids and social media would erupt with headlines. Billionaire Julian Roth slaps pregnant wife at charity gala, mistress involved. Any trace of public sympathy or uncertainty would be buried beneath the avalanche of condemnation. And for Camille, one silent promise rang out in her soul. He will never hurt me or my child again. 2 days after the catastrophic scene at the gala, Camille remained tucked away in her father's penthouse high above the Chicago skyline. Richard Whittaker had deployed a full private security team to guard against the barrage of media attention. Camille was holed up in a quiet bedroom with panoramic windows overlooking Grant Park. The city sparkled beyond the glass, but inside, her heart churned with grief and anger. Margaret Cho had arrived earlier that evening, her arms full of legal folders and her expression unwavering. Richard was pushing to press assault charges against Julian, or at the very least, file a restraining order. Camille, still emotionally raw, hadn't decided. She was trapped in a storm of betrayal and heartbreak that refused to settle. Every breath felt like treading water. She could hardly recognize the woman she had been just days before, the polished socialite, the glowing mother-to-be. Now there was only a burning question echoing in her mind. How much of her life had been a lie? As Margaret conferred with Richard in the adjoining living room, Camille's phone buzzed. An unknown number again. Warily, she answered. "Mrs. Roth. Camille, it's Alyssa. Alyssa Hunter." I'm so sorry," the voice said, cracking with tension. "It's taken me time to build up the courage to call, but there's something you need to know." Camille's chest tightened. "Alyssa, please, just tell me. I've worked for Julian for years. I stayed loyal because, well, he used to treat me with some decency. But after what happened," she paused, voice shaking. "I can't keep this quiet anymore. I found a chain of emails and files on his computer about Sabrina. She's not just some mistress." Camille's breath caught. "She's been siphoning money, laundering it through offshore accounts. She pretends to run a European gallery, but it's all a front. She convinced Julian to redirect funds from Roth Dynamics' philanthropic division, supposedly to invest in overseas expansions, but it's all a lie." Camille pressed her hand to her mouth. "Are you absolutely sure?" "Positive," Alyssa said. "The transfers are massive, and they trace back to fake shell companies. She's been using his own charitable arm to launder money. I honestly think he was too blinded by infatuation to realize what she was doing." Camille stood slowly, pacing the room, her legs trembling. The very institution she had helped fund and protect, now twisted into a vessel for fraud. Camille instinctively reached for her stomach, a protective gesture. Her heart pounded. "This is bigger than infidelity," she whispered. Alyssa continued. "I've already sent the evidence to Margaret Cho. It's all there. Bank records, emails, flagged transactions, and there's more. I overheard Julian on a call with Sabrina last night. He was furious, blaming her for the PR nightmare, and she threatened him. Said if he tried to cut ties, she'd expose everything." Camille closed her eyes. Blackmail, financial crimes, betrayal wrapped in manipulation. The deception had layers, each one more poisonous than the last. "Alyssa, thank you," she said quietly. "You did the right thing." After ending the call, Camille summoned Margaret. The attorney listened in silence, her expression darkening. "This changes everything," Margaret said, voice sharp with purpose. "Julian's not just facing domestic assault charges anymore. He could be implicated in criminal financial misconduct. Sabrina too," Margaret said gravely. "If you file for divorce, we can use this evidence to secure a substantial settlement and protect your father's name from this scandal." Camille felt a complicated swirl of emotions, anxiety, relief, and something else, a fierce, clear-eyed resolve. It was no longer just about her heartbreak. It was about justice for herself, her unborn child, and the legacy of the Whitaker family name. Julian might have obliterated their marriage with betrayal and violence, but she now held a powerful card, proof of deeper criminal wrongdoing. And it was up to her to decide how to use it. Inside his own penthouse across the city, Julian Roth paced like a caged predator. The fallout from the charity gala had detonated his pristine image in record time. Roth Dynamics stock had plunged. The board was in a panic. His phone lit up hourly with missed calls from executives, reporters, even his own mother. He ignored them all. The only person he'd spoken to was Sabrina Devereaux, who was now demanding a sizable payout to keep quiet. Their last phone call had been vicious. "You don't get to walk away from me, Julian," she had hissed. "If I go down, I'll drag you with me. I have the records, every wire transfer." He'd screamed back, "Don't threaten me. I can bury you." But even as he said it, he knew how weak it sounded. He was spiraling, and Sabrina knew it. The woman he once believed was an escape had turned into his most dangerous liability. She had played him like a fiddle, and now the price was his very empire. She had manipulated him from the start, stroking his ego while lining her own pockets. Now she wanted hush money, far more than he could shift around discreetly without raising red flags at Roth Dynamics. Alone in his wrecked office, Julian slammed a fist onto his desk. Papers and files flew. including a tabloid headline screaming across the page, "Billionaire Roth's violent outburst caught on camera, pregnant wife assaulted in public." The bold print made his stomach turn. Beneath it, the photo of his hand mid-slap, frozen forever. In a surge of desperation, he dialed Camille's old number. It went straight to voicemail. He tried Richard Whittaker's line, also unanswered. Even Alyssa Hunter had abandoned him. The silence felt suffocating. Each unanswered call was a stone sealing him deeper into his self-made tomb. In the quiet hallways of Roth Dynamics, his empire no longer felt like a fortress. It felt like a tomb. He collapsed into a chair, pouring himself a heavy glass of scotch despite the early hour. He had never meant to hurt Camille. He told himself that. A lie repeated too often, it had begun to sound like truth. But the echo of her gasp, the flash of her stunned face, haunted him. That it was a moment of rage, unlike him, not who he really was. But the guilt gnawed at him, burrowed into his thoughts, poisoning his sleep with visions of losing it all: his company, his child, his reputation. A chime sounded. New email. He picked up his phone with trembling hands. From Margaret Cho, subject, legal proceedings. Julian opened the message. As he read the cold, formal language, the blood drained from his face. Camille was seeking a protective order on grounds of domestic violence and an immediate freeze on specific Roth Dynamics assets pending divorce proceedings. The letter also hinted at potential criminal investigations into financial misconduct. The final line chilled Julian to the bone. "We advise you to respond within 72 hours to avoid an escalated legal approach." His vision swam. The words blurred, like cold steel pressing against his temples. Every shred of confidence unraveled in a single sentence. They knew everything. The money laundering, his entanglement with Sabrina. The web he'd allowed to spin around him had finally unraveled. Panic, unlike anything he'd ever felt, gripped his chest. He wanted to lash out, to blame someone, anyone. But deep down, he understood this chaos was his own doing. He sank to his knees by the window, staring at the city below, the empire he had built now bearing the weight of his own betrayal. Staring at the sprawling skyline of Chicago, the city he once thought he ruled, Julian Roth realized his reckoning had arrived. And unless he moved fast, the man once celebrated as a titan of industry would be reduced to rubble by the fire he had ignited. Camille, by contrast, sat in her father's penthouse with an odd, quiet calm washing over her. Margaret Cho had just left after laying out the next steps. She was filing for an emergency protective order, one that would legally prevent Julian from approaching Camille or the unborn child. Divorce papers were being drafted, citing domestic violence and adultery. A financial investigation into Roth Dynamics and its dealings with Sabrina Devereaux had officially commenced. Camille sat by the large bay window, her palm resting gently on her belly. The weight in her belly was no longer just life, it was her purpose. Each heartbeat matched her resolve to build a new future. Free of fear and filled with strength. She was no longer the woman clinging to a fragile marriage. She had looked betrayal in the eye and endured it. Now her resolve burned steady and bright. A soft knock pulled her attention. Richard stepped in, his typically composed face lined with concern. "How are you feeling?" he asked gently. Camille gave a faint smile. "Better than I expected. The bruises are healing, and the baby's fine. Doctor said everything looks good." Hearing the doctor's reassurance was like a balm to her soul, proof that even after the darkest storm, beginnings could be tender. Richard exhaled. "I'm relieved. I know this. This must be a lot." She nodded, her eyes tracing the skyline. "I never imagined this, that I'd marry someone who'd betray me like that, hit me. But I can't sit in that pain. I have to move forward, for the baby. For myself." Richard hesitated, then added, "I called a few friends in the DA's office. If Julian's finances trace back to anything illegal, he may face criminal charges. And if he tries to paint this as anything but abuse, we have more than a dozen witness accounts from the gala." Camille's eyes lit with a quiet flicker of relief. Justice, for the first time, felt within reach, not just for her, but for every risk she was taking now. "Thank you, Dad. I'm grateful you're with me through this. It still feels unreal, like everything fell apart overnight." He gently wrapped an arm around her shoulders. "You're stronger than you think, Camille. You'll get through this." She leaned into him, remembering a time when Julian had once made her laugh. That man was gone now, just a ghost of a naive memory. She exhaled, feeling the tension of days unravel from her shoulders as she embraced the support she had earned, not as a wife, but as her own person. Later that day, she began to put her life back in order. She wrote personal letters to a few close friends, explaining that she was safe, but needed time and distance. She also made quiet calls to the boards and committees she had once led, stepping back from several high-profile philanthropic projects. When Camille reached out to the women's shelter she co-chaired, the staff there responded with overwhelming support, offering resources, protection, and anything she might need. Their warmth, their unwavering voices through the receiver, anchored her in a moment that might have otherwise swallowed her whole. In those small actions, Camille began to rediscover a sense of direction. She was no longer Julian Roth's wife. That identity had crumbled. She was a mother-to-be, a philanthropist, a woman taking her dignity back, step by step. Each gesture, each phone call, each minute spent holding her breath and pushing forward stitched together a patchwork of resilience. Each rung she climbed out of despair was forged from her own willpower, and deep down she knew a final confrontation with Julian loomed. But she no longer feared it. The man who tried to break her was about to discover that the fiercest storms are survived by those who refuse to be swept away. Exactly 48 hours after Margaret Cho's formal notice hit his inbox, Julian Roth arrived at Richard Whittaker's penthouse, two newly retained attorneys in tow. The doorman watched his approach warily, well aware of the scandal that had captivated Chicago. But since the meeting had been arranged through Margaret Cho's office, Julian was allowed upstairs. Inside the elegant living room, softened by warm lamplight and heavy drapes, Camille sat on a velvet couch, serene, composed, and visibly pregnant. Her hands rested gently on her belly, not just protectively but with a quiet pride. The fading mark on her cheek was now a pale yellow, but the memory of what he'd done remained vivid in her expression. Margaret Cho, Richard, and Camille were already seated, awaiting the arrival. Julian's lawyers offered stiff greetings. Tension thickened the air like fog. Margaret's tone was clipped and formal as she gestured to the dining table, which was lined with documents. "We're here to finalize terms of the protective order, address the divorce proceedings, and begin discussions on the financial misconduct charges." Julian's jaw tensed. "Allegations," he muttered coldly. "Not proof?" Margaret opened a folder. These documents were retrieved from Roth Dynamics financial accounts, showing repeated transfers to shell corporations registered to Sabrina Devereaux. "We also have her Cayman Island bank records tracing the flow of funds." Julian's face darkened. "She told me it was for expansion opportunities in Europe. I was misled." Camille finally spoke. Her voice was composed, but each word cut clean and sharp. "And so you used charitable funds to impress her? Money meant for shelters and schools, for real good?" The sting in her voice wasn't just from betrayal. It was the echo of every sleepless night, every lonely ultrasound, every public humiliation endured in silence. Julian looked at her, eyes full of something that resembled remorse. "Camille, you have to believe me." "I never meant to hurt you," Julian murmured. Camille stared back, unwavering. "And yet, you did." His lawyers, eager to seize control of the spiraling situation, stepped in. "We propose a private settlement, along with a gag order. In return, Mr. Roth will cede a portion of his assets." Camille raised a hand. Her voice was steady. "No." The room stilled. "You lost the right to silence this. I've already filed for divorce, and I won't be part of some cover-up. Women, especially pregnant women, need to see that abusers don't get to hide behind money." Her voice didn't crack. It rose, firm, composed, a voice shaped by pain but sharpened by purpose. Julian's shoulders sagged. The fight had drained from his face. He looked hollow. "So this is it?" he asked. Camille drew in a breath, bracing herself. "There's one more thing." Her voice softened but sharpened in intensity. "You accused me of provoking you. You tried to justify hitting me, but I have a secret, one that changes everything." She looked to Richard, who gave a quiet nod. A hush fell over the room. Camille squared her shoulders. "The baby I'm carrying has a medical condition. I found out recently. It'll need specialized care, maybe surgeries. It won't be easy." She paused, trembling, but not from fear, from the sheer weight of everything left unsaid. Tears slid down her cheeks. "And all the money you wasted on Sabrina? That could have helped. That should have helped." "You didn't just betray me, Julian. You betrayed your child's chance at a healthy life." Julian blanched, his eyes darting to her belly. "I didn't know," he whispered, his voice wrecked with disbelief. He stumbled back slightly, the revelation hitting harder than anything Margaret could have filed in court. Silence reigned. Margaret's cold stare said it all. Whatever thin thread of sympathy might have existed for him in court, it had now snapped entirely. And for Camille, a deep, powerful sense of closure settled into her chest. Not triumph, not vindication, just the quiet relief of truth, finally, undeniably laid bare. Her pain, her child's challenge, Julian's greed, it had all come to light. And no matter what followed, she had reclaimed the truth he tried so desperately to bury. In the weeks that followed, the fallout was swift and unforgiving. Camille's legal team, armed with every shred of evidence Alyssa Hunter had provided, demonstrated Julian's direct involvement in Sabrina's fraudulent schemes. Simultaneously, the district attorney's office launched a formal investigation into potential criminal conduct. Sabrina Devereaux, realizing the walls were closing in, fled the country. Julian Roth was left to face the reckoning alone. The board of Roth Dynamics convened an emergency vote and ousted him as CEO. The once gleaming brand's reputation lay in ruins. Its stock tanked. Civil suits loomed, including Camille's demand for damages, both for assault and the misuse of charitable funds. Every news headline, every interview Camille declined, added weight to Julian's disgrace. His downfall was public, and it was deserved. Public sympathy flooded toward the woman he had left battered and humiliated, a pregnant wife, fighting not just for herself, but for her unborn child. And through it all, Camille found light in the ruins. She pushed forward, determined to secure the best care possible for her baby. Her father's connections made that goal attainable. Her philanthropic work, paused but not forgotten, began to rebuild under new, honest leadership. She had lost a marriage, but found her voice. She had been wounded, but not broken. And that, she knew, was its own kind of victory. A coalition of pediatric specialists and compassionate donors quickly mobilized, raising funds and awareness for conditions like the one Camille's newborn would face. At the forefront of this movement stood Camille herself, channeling pain into purpose, transforming heartbreak into advocacy that resonated with parents around the globe. Richard Whittaker watched his daughter with immense pride. Gone was the quiet, carefully poised socialite. In her place now stood a woman of fierce resolve, compassion, and unmatched strength. Together, they restructured part of the Whittaker Foundation to focus entirely on pediatric care, renaming it in honor of Camille's unborn son. On a brisk October morning, Camille gave birth to a baby boy. The child required immediate intervention, but doctors remained hopeful. His prognosis, while complex, offered optimism. Margaret Cho visited Camille at the hospital that same week, hand-delivering a final set of papers that officially concluded the divorce. A judge had ruled in Camille's favor. She received full custody. Julian's personal assets were frozen pending the outcome of the criminal probe. Standing beside the transparent bassinet, Camille signed her name, sealing not just legal freedom, but emotional liberation. When she was discharged, photographers loitered outside the hospital, but tight security kept them at bay. Camille didn't flinch. Instead of hiding behind sunglasses or bodyguards, she cradled her newborn, allowing the world to see her strength, grace, and calm. The headlines read, "Camille Roth leaves hospital with newborn son, triumphant, after medical intervention." A stark contrast to Julian Roth's spiral. Days later, Alyssa Hunter visited Richard's penthouse. She came bearing soft apologies for her silence, but Camille simply thanked her for ultimately stepping forward. Alyssa handed over small gifts, tokens from staff at Roth Dynamics who had by then abandoned Julian's toxic leadership. The gesture gave Camille a rare sense of closure. Julian Roth, meanwhile, faced a long reckoning. Court proceedings loomed, his finances were in tatters. And Helena Devereaux? She never returned. She disappeared after draining him of everything useful. The man once hailed as a visionary now became a cautionary tale, his name spoken only in hushed tones of scandal and downfall. Camille, in contrast, stepped forward. With her son in her arms and her father by her side, she embraced this new life. A mother, an advocate, a survivor. Her scars weren't shameful, they were proof. Of endurance. Of rebirth. She was no longer a victim, she was a warrior. A woman who had rewritten her narrative. and who vowed her son's life would be built on integrity, love, and truth. And so the story of Julian Roth and Camille Whitaker finds its conclusion, a tale shaped by betrayal, ambition, and the high cost of unchecked ego. But from the wreckage of that fractured marriage rose a force stronger than wealth or fame, a mother forging a new path with clarity and purpose. Camille's quiet strength became a beacon, a message to all. True power lies in standing tall against abuse, rising above ruin, and protecting the most vulnerable. As Julian faces the fallout of his own destruction, Camille walks on, with courage born of sorrow and the fierce, unwavering love of a mother. If this story moved you, please like, share, and subscribe to our channel. Your support helps us continue bringing you powerful stories of redemption, strength, and the triumph of the human spirit. Thank you for watching.